Well, we are here with Holly Berkeley Fletcher, the author, writer, uh, publisher of A Zebra Without a Stripes on Substack.
She's in
Um,
her CIA black site right now.
um, I think I first came across you in the comment section on the Bulwark. But really, you are here today to talk about how Tier Hardy has disappointed you as a pastor.
Yeah, actually. Actually, the main thing he did was he left the church. So that was
I left your church. I didn't
disappointing.
leave the church.
I don't know. Like that's debatable. I mean, I grew up evangelical, so one's own church, that is the church, Like I decide what the church is, you know?
You know that dangerously true.
Yeah, it is. Like I decide. Like, yeah.
Well, Holly, it's nice to meet you, and I've already forgiven you for forgetting two of the sermons I delivered at Mount Olivet some years ago. I don't know how
You
you
preached there
could have.
twice?
I did, yeah, I did, and she
Well,
forgot both
but
of
did
them.
you do the traditional or the modern service?
It was not traditional, no.
Oh, okay. Because although
Which
now,
is Jason's least favorite kind of worship.
It's true.
we go to the modern one, which is actually probably not my preference. Actually, tiered these days, I go to both because I've joined the choir. So,
Whoa.
and
All
my
right, so
Whoa.
and my family will not go to the traditional. They will barely go to the modern, to be frank with you. And so I sing in the choir. This is how good of a Christian I am these days, Tier. I mean, granted, I am a mainline Christian, which means I'm going to hell. But here on earth, I'm a very active um, person who is trying to impersonate a Christian as a Methodist, and I go to the traditional service. I sing in the choir. I drive home. I get all of the members of my household out of bed, which they are still in, and I like literally herd them into. I like practically have to dress them, and they're teenagers now. So, and my husband too, by the way. I have to like put on their clothes and like herd them into and like forcibly put them in the car and like then drive back, and then I have to sit. I take communion twice, and which I think makes me
Extra sanctified right there.
holy. Yeah. So that's how good of a Christian I am these days.
Holly, so it feels like it feels like every person who's ever come on our podcast says something like, "Well, I used to be a Methodist," and then they tell us how they journeyed into some other
Like
Alt.
Buddhism,
form
yoga.
of Christianity. But you are now a Methodist because you used to be Southern Baptist,
Yeah.
and you were raised by missionary parents in Kenya, and you have written a book about that. So first, I'm curious
That's a great segue you did there. It
I it's pretty good.
was
Um,
a good segue.
what prompted you to write The Missionary Kids?
So I've just, I've done various types of writing my whole life. I was an academic for a while, and then of course I was in the CIA, which is very boring writing. Anyway, but I started writing just for my own enjoyment and self-expression um, when my kids were born, and I just as an effort to maintain some sort of sanity. And yeah, so I've always loved writing, and I actually first wrote a memoir, um, and then that sort of wasn't marketable really, and so I then turned it into this book, which is it has elements of my story, but I interviewed a lot of other missionary kids and surveyed them and integrated the stories about the missionary kid experience into a larger sort of historical, even political narrative. So it basically is it's the foundational assumption is that missionary kids are excellent sources on white evangelicalism because they are the heroes of the children of the heroes. The missionary
Hmm.
enterprise for evangelicals is very, especially for Southern Baptists. I mean, it's like absolutely central to their entire self-concept. But even more broadly for evangelicals, foreign missions is like such a big deal for them. And so they're the children of the heroes, but they have kind of the insider outsider knowledge and perspective of kind of the costs of, what it is to be the poster children for evangelicalism, and then an insider outsider perspective on the church, the American evangelical culture itself, because you grow up as, kind of, again, the poster children or the children of the heroes, but at the same time you grow up with this sort of additional layer of perspective. You're not really identifying with being an American in the same way that someone that was raised here would. And so, you know, so I use the MKs as kind of a window into American evangelicalism.
Why
Um,
the distinction there
yeah.
between you keep? I mean, in the book it comes up white evangelicalism versus evangelicalism. Can you hash out that distinction?
Well, the missionary enterprise has always and still is, for Americans, very white, and the racial narrative is actually central to it. I mean, it starts with the Southern Baptist Convention. They broke away specifically to appoint slaveholders as missionaries. They actually broke away, as I'm sure you guys know. The Baptists are, in theory, Congregationalists, although in practice the Southern Baptist Convention is a little, fiefdom. But in theory, they're Congregationalists, but they came together as in a broader national organization in the early 19th century in a mission board, which the idea of missions and sending people out as missionaries, vocational missionaries, was a new thing. And it was sort of an Anglo-American movement that grew out of evangelicalism itself. And so as the issue of slavery became more and more, tense in both the Anglo-American community, Baptist community, they broke off to have their own mission board, basically. So, and from there, missions is absolutely central to the Southern Baptist mythology. They cite it, anytime they're caught doing something not great, they're like, oh, but the missionaries. So while they're holding slaves and defending slavery, they're sending people to, overseas, to countries where to minister to people, non-white people. And so race is very central to the movement. There are very few African American missionaries. They've actually had an interest early on, as we all know. Like, Black evangelical Christians are just as devout, but they haven't had the money and they didn't meet the theological approval of these white mission boards, and so they were pretty much excluded from the missionary movement. And then there's still just not a huge presence, American Blacks, that is, in the missionary world. So it's actually really important to bring in the racial element, because it's really central to the narrative.
And one of the things you're sensitive to in the book, in these myths that you're unpacking, is um, the power imbalances that these myths can mask over. Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so the global as evangelicalism has gone global, missionary activity has also gone global, and actually Americans have dominated the missionary movement for probably at least 100 years.
USA,
Definitely since
USA.
World War II. In the 19th century, the British, and early 20th century, the British were really involved, but particularly since World War II, not just Americans, but American evangelicals, the mainliners, the heathen people like us, kind of ceded the ground. Discomfort over colonialism, and basically overthinking it, as we do. They they kind of got out of or started to get out of the missionary game. So since World War II, white evangelical Americans have really dominated the movement. But as obviously they've been very successful spreading their brand of Christianity around the world, the global evangelical church has become heavily not American. And then in recent years, more and more of countries like Brazil and Korea and to some extent Nigeria and some other countries have started sending out missionaries. And so Americans right now only account for about half, but they still dominate. They still hold the levers of power. This is not me saying this. This is what missiologists, non-American missiologists, talk about. A lot of the scholarship and strategy and academia, certainly the money, the money, Americans, we have a lot of money compared to the rest of the world. And so like the money, the purse strings, and then that translates into controlling a lot of the structures and theology. That's the big one is theology, and that's long been the case, to where that's one of the excuses or that have been brought up repeatedly of why more control can't be passed off, is because then if you don't, then they go off in crazy worlds. They get theologically messy. And so that's been controlling the theology has been a big part of it too. And they've been so successful that at this point now it's almost like an echo effect, to where even as maybe Americans are losing influence or giving up sort of more power and influence in global evangelicalism, they've done such a great job spreading their particular brand of theology that when they hear from global Christians, it comes back in an echo, including the Christian nationalism piece. Brazil is the chief example of that. The Bolsonaro movement is basically a Trumpist movement, but in Brazil. Um,
But it's an evangelical movement. I don't think I even knew that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Brazilian evangelicals are Bolsonaro's primary or a big part of his bloc, for what I understand. And then I hear, even in Africa, I spend a lot of time in Africa and around Africa. Like where I grew up, Kenya is so not just Christian, but evangelical Christian. And you see, like every politician, using the same language. You have your pious politician. The Kenyan president is, I think his wife is particularly devout. I think they're building like a prayer chapel anyway, they're building like a church on the grounds of State House, and they bring in like American evangelical pastors to preach, and he's incredibly devout. He's also a formerly indicted war criminal in The Hague, so that kind of thing.
So, something to aspire to, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. But that was he's been
Well, I
born
was wondering
again.
if we would get an invitation. I was wondering if Jason and I would get an invitation to come preach, but now I don't think we've met certain criteria on the indictment scale of
Well, you
being
have other
invited to preach
problems.
there.
I mean, you have a lot
Lots
of
of other
problems.
problems.
Yeah.
Holly, so bringing up Brazil. I was just reading earlier this morning. Um, do you have any insights as a missionary kid and seeing evangelical culture kind of spread globally? Do you have any insights that an ordinary person might miss about? I can't stop thinking about the hard juxtaposition between Erica Kirk's expression of forgiveness, followed by the president giving an opposite message, um,
Yeah,
and
it's
and
actually
and both
classic.
and both being received by the same people.
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
how are those two things possible?
Well, and not just received, like both celebrated,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
in the same way. Like,
Well, I think a hallmark of evangelical theology, going back to, the era of pro-slavery Christianity, that's how that's sort of the genesis, compartmentalizing the personal and the broader societal, political, communal, sort of compartmentalizing those two things is that was a key device in protecting slavery, right? So as slavery became more conspicuous in America after the American Revolution and in the wake of the Great Awakenings that emphasized, personal believers, the authority of the believer and the access to God of like each individual believer, and the worth, that implied the sort of worth of each soul, as that made slavery a lot more conspicuous. So you have to sort of compensate for that. And so dividing things out and sort of like, okay, well, this is, society has to be run this way for, there to be order and there to be, that's the political and the societal. And then obviously race became a huge part of justifying slavery as well. And then over here, but really, it's the personal that God really cares about. It's the personal salvation of individual souls for the afterlife. It's the how each person conducts themselves. So you could be a slaveholder, but you could be a kind slaveholder, or maybe you're not so kind, but it's important to not be kind because you have to keep order for the overall institution and to contain the potential violent backlash of your slaves, et cetera, et cetera. So that has deep roots in evangelical Christianity. Um, and you still see it, really, to this day. I mean, I see it in missions really clearly. And I would say the sort of, in the book, I sort of narratively tie the missionary movement to a Christian nationalist movement. And it is more of a narrative link. It's not a one-to-one link. So like most missionaries I know, current missionaries, not retired, like retired, that's the older missionaries. That's what's really disappointing to a lot of us, is to see our parents, who should have this global perspective, sort of go in with the MAGA movement. But most of the missionaries, not all, but most of the missionaries I know that are on the field now, are not fans of Donald Trump. But they sort of see it as like, that's over the, that's like over there. It's regrettable. It's like, and they see, many of their supporters are MAGA, and that's regrettable. But you sort of just, that has nothing to do with my work that I'm doing that's so important, for the
Mhm.
Lord. And so like I'm over here, spreading the gospel, and in some cases, some missionaries do just more straight evangelism, and some missionaries do more sort of humanitarian work with that as well. So, but I'm over here doing my sort of work. And what's going on in America, that's just like, it doesn't really concern me. Or even what's going on in the country, they don't get involved. I mean, for some good reasons, they don't really get involved in the politics of the country, or including the, like, missionary. We had Southern Baptists had missionaries in apartheid South Africa. They
Hmm.
didn't, they weren't anti-apartheid activists. I mean, part of that is because they could be kicked out by the host government. But part of it is just this sort of separation. Like I'm saving souls for the afterlife. Like it's
So
not
you're
my business to get into the political. So to me, when I saw that, it fit with that. So Erica Kirk gets up there, and by the way, I mean, on a personal level, that would be the expectation of most evangelicals, is that they love those stories. They love those sort of on the personal level, these sort of forgiveness narratives. And it, by the way, this sort of narrative of instantaneous forgiveness, like she says it, and so that is true. She has forgiven him. It's like a one-time thing. I think we all know that forgiveness is much more of a slog than that. Um, but this sort of instantaneous, forgiveness narrative, the instantaneous sort of redemption narrative where you can be born again and you're just completely different and that's the end of the story. They love those kind of things. And so it really didn't surprise me that she would do that. And then it also didn't surprise me that Trump would do his thing, because they, yeah, societally, they see things very differently than they do on the personal level.
Hmm. And that, I mean, that gets at like the myth of calling and sanctity that you note in the book, that you know if you're primarily the hero of your story, you kind of just focused on the work in front of you.
Yeah, well, and then the calling thing is, again, when I say it's a narrative link between missions and Christian nationalism, because, missions in the American church and in the sort of American Christian mind is really tied to this idea of American exceptionalism and the city on, the Puritans, the city on the hill, and that they were building this model society. And, there's obviously a secular version of American exceptionalism. But it very much got married up certainly in the 19th century with this idea of, um, American Christians being the key to sort of an American destiny, for, being the model nation, showing the world, how to be.
It'd be
And
nice if we could go back to those aspirations.
yeah, I was going to say, I'm a former CIA analyst and a patriot and an American historian. That was my academic work as a historian of America. And to a large extent, I believe in American exceptionalism. I don't think it's like divinely ordained, but I do think this country has had a huge impact on, the development of democracy and democratic institutions in history and around the world. And I'm one who thinks that that's a good thing for humanity. And so I have, now I think we're losing the plot, but I have been a big time, but I have been in a secular sense a fan of that narrative to some degree. I think the problem is when it gets tangled up with Christian identity, then you have a problem. And then it's like, well, America is an exceptional Christian nation. That the Christian part of it
Mhm.
is part of America's destiny. And that's actually the opposite of what I think American exceptionalism is supposed to be, which is a pluralistic liberal society where people of all kinds and all beliefs live together peaceably, which is really hard to do, actually. As now we're seeing how hard it is to do.
Because of the
And when
bulwark.
you look at, oh, I was gonna say, and when you look at the narrative of American Christian exceptionalism, it's white. It goes back to that the distinction you made earlier between white
Absolutely.
evangelicalism and just evangelicalism, because white American exceptionalism, uh, for white people like us, like, has been pretty good, right? It's worked out pretty well for us, for people who look like us, at least. But if you're not a white person, if you're not from the East Coast, West Coast, like, it looks a little bit different, and it feels like that's forgotten, or just it maybe
Oh
not
yeah,
forgotten. It was
sure.
because it was never
Yeah.
taught.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, we have not lived up to our own values, but what I'm, just to clarify what I said to bring race into it. Yeah. I mean, what I mean is, like, as a force in history, the ideal, because the founding fathers, although they were obviously racist, sexist guys, the system that they laid out is actually hospitable to pluralistic, liberalism, like, it's actually, whether they meant it or not, that is a system that can contain people of all races and creeds and ethnicities, and it's a system that allows for that. So even though they didn't mean all of that at the time, but just for the time, any sort of erasure of hierarchy as a basis for society was pretty radical at the time. So even their attack on sort of class hierarchy and that kind of thing was the beginning of the unraveling of hierarchy in society as a basis for society. And that's what I mean. America has been a leader on that. Now we're seem to be reconstructing some of those hierarchies.
Yeah, I guess, just to be fair, um, Jonathan Edwards, the Calvinist, was a slaveholder as well.
Such a fun
George
guy.
George Whitfield, the Methodist missionary, also a slave owner. So it's not just the Southern Baptists.
No, no, no. I think the difference is, and having come from an evangelical tradition to a liberal tradition, obviously all of our liberal churches, our mainline churches, have a bad racial history as well. But what I see the difference is liberal Christians have reckoned with that, like on a deep theological level, where I think evangelicals have sort of paid lip service to, oh yeah, we support slavery and segregation, and we're really sorry for that. But
Oops.
they haven't really
My
looked,
bad.
yeah, they haven't really excavated the theology that supported
Hmm.
that, which they mostly still retain, and they haven't really, and maybe they don't jettison that theology, but I think they need to reckon with the idea that they have been deeply theologically wrong, and
Yeah,
so
I was in Turkey in March, and some of the uh, that really is the birthplace of Christianity, right? And so I just remembered, that it was obvious to the ancient church fathers, that the implications of the gospel are that slavery is not okay. And and so it's like, huh. Well, it was obvious to them, like, so it's like we've inherited a Christianity in the West that was deliberately blind, to these kind of cultural forces that were antithetical to Christianity. And so I think you're right that it requires excavation.
yeah, and again, it goes beyond just the racial element. It's again, it's first of all, it's the arrogance that's so part and parcel of white evangelicals, and I talk about it in the book, the sort of collective narcissism of it, to where that affects missions, because that's again needing to the idea that we have like, yes, Christianity's been around for 2,000 years, but it wasn't until Americans came on and said that we finally got it right. We finally got the theology right. And it's not just, Christianity. It is like our particular version of Christianity, the personal relationship with Jesus. And again, I'm not saying,
Mhm.
nothing's wrong with that per se, but it's like, it's the idea that we are sort of necessarily right about everything. What that does is it necessitates a need for control when you're dealing with global Christians and different cultures and different races. And honestly, I grew up hearing that most black Christians were not really Christians. First, they
Hmm.
voted for black American Christians, I would say. And then I grew up hearing that, about like in the African context, sort of, oh, they're getting too far afield. They're kind of losing their way theologically. So we got to go back in and like get them back. I heard there was just white evangelicalism is so shot through with the assumption that we are exactly right. Certainly, I heard terrible things about mainline Christians.
Some
Um,
of it was probably right.
yeah. But it's like you have not read, if that's your sort of baseline theological assumption and the centerpiece of your self conception as a culture, like you have not reckoned with history. I'm sorry, you just haven't done it.
Yeah, I sometimes, like one of my guilty pleasures is looking at what David Platt has put on Twitter. He's the pastor at
Head of the
McLean Bible
International
Church.
Mission Board,
And and
big booster.
and he's got all these videos where he's like somewhere in the world, and like were it not for him, like this place would not have ever heard the God. I'm like like that's not true. Like, there's probably a Catholic church like a block away from you. Like it's just so narrow and narcissistic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's such a weird guilty pleasure. Like, how did you?
And he's not a
What
bad
was going on in
person.
your life that you said this is how
This just
this is
fascinates
where I
me.
get my jollies?
And he's actually one of the better people in that world, I think. So,
Well, so
Um,
we as we've been
um,
talking, I, I wrote my master's thesis on missional theology as it being a
oh,
catalyst for
I
change.
should have talked to
And
you for the book. You probably could have
like,
taught me
I
many
mean, you
things.
missed out on tons of great research.
I did.
Um,
I'm not
but
jealous.
one of the issues I had, and I'm looking up at my bookshelf, like in all the books that I used for my thesis that I haven't read since, is that from the mainline's perspective, I couldn't find much research outside of short-term missions, right? Where we load our kids into a van, they go off, within a 3-hour drive of home. they do some work and they come back. And as someone who is a recovering evangelical who's now in the main line, I guess one of the things that this has been stirring in me is like, what do pastors like me and Jason, or just the average person sitting in an uncomfortable pew or church basement in the main line miss about what it means to be a missionary?
Well,
Because everything I knew about a missionary is missionaries showed up every couple years, right? It was a weird Sunday. Everything was different. There was a special offering, and that was it. That's all I knew growing up. And then as a teenager, my mission work was like going off and building a house for someone that, and taking money out of the local economy that could have been given to someone else to build the house. But that's in my thesis.
yeah, I'd rather it be in America, honestly, than I just feel like the narrative of these short-term mission is just so, I don't know, it's just kind of screwed up.
Mhm.
Like it's almost like the narrative is like you get extra points for going overseas and to a country that is non-white. Like that's just a bad. Um, I
What
yeah.
so like so you have this personal history in the missionary movement. You also have history as a CIA analyst. Um, as a United Methodist, I
I
know. Um,
Are you going to ask me the question I hope no one ever asks me, which is like, is that hypocritical to be critical of the missionary movement and work for the CIA? I hope nobody
oh
asks.
no 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 no! I was curious because
Yes.
that's the
I
next
know
book.
I know in the United Methodist Church, we have an organization called Volunteers in Mission, and that had a very complicated history in terms of funding that was related to Cold War politics and the kind of right and left factions within the denomination. And I'm wondering if there's like a similar dynamic in the Southern Baptist Church that missionary movements had a lot of had political motivations and behind some of its funding as well.
I mean, to some extent, again, I think religion is always connected to broader political, societal, geopolitical trends. But I feel like, I don't know, like the missionary movement goes back way beyond that, you know?
Okay.
And I think and my experience with it is, it's not like my parents were, I didn't have the sense that we were spreading sort of Americanism, I mean, I was aware of the Cold War or whatever. Kenya was a staunch US ally, so there's that. They was also, I grew up under a brutal dictator who was a staunch US ally. That's another whole thing. But they were just, it was more concerned with spreading an American style of Christianity and theology. It was a theological thing. I mean, it's probably tied to that. And again, frankly, I'm I'm an American patriot. Like I think the American system. I'm a fan of capitalism, which is not popular in liberal Christianity. But
Ooh.
I think the free market liberal democracy system is superior to Soviet communism or communism of any kind. I've seen even good socialism go real bad in Africa.
Hmm.
I can expand on that if you want to, but like I'm a fan, but I didn't get a sense that they were sort of foot soldiers of just like I feel like the narrative of British missionaries as foot soldiers of the colonial
Yeah.
empire. Were they? Yes, absolutely. But I think they had their own motivations and their own sort of agendas that sometimes didn't, that actually were undermined the colonial agenda. So I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And ultimately, I think missionaries are motivated by their particular brand of religion and theology more than a geopolitical agenda.
So you're the mother of teenagers, you said?
Yes, yes.
How many kids you have?
Two, yeah.
Um, I'm curious, just it's because your book is different, right? It, there's
Like good different,
yeah,
not like different. It's good
it's a
different.
so there's
Yeah.
the Christian publishing world is rife with people doing quote unquote deconstruction. out of kind of a real animus towards the faith of their family or the faith in which it was given them by a particular kind of Christianity. And so I'm wondering, like how do you come to a place of loving critique
Well, I
for
worked on
the faith
that.
that you grow up in?
Well, I worked on that. I really I pulled a lot of punches in this book actually, because maybe it doesn't seem like that. I don't know. People have told me that they think it's fair and that it's sort of loving, I suppose. Um, because I mean the truth is complicated. You know, I loved my childhood. I loved that I grew up. I love Kenya. I you know, I wouldn't trade it. I had a generally happy childhood. But, you know, and some of the people I interviewed did, and some of them had a horrific experience full of lots of trauma and abuse and violence and things like that. Um, so I think it's I don't think it's like a clear, you know, like good bad, good versus evil thing. And evangelical Christianity writ large, I think is also like there it's mixed. There's a lot of things about it that are really great and a lot of lives that have been turned around within that context. I don't think it's a simple story. But what I wanted to do is this is an area of white evangelicalism that hasn't really been certainly it's not seen in a complex view by evangelicals, but even people outside of that, there's it's sort of a heroic sort of narrative that I think hides a lot of problems that are indicative of white evangelicalism itself. And you know, I always say like I probably would have been content to just leave white evangelicalism myself and just slink off to a mainline church and not have anything to say. But the problem is when you have a religious culture in a pluralistic democratic society that has basically gone in with an authoritarian movement, then your their faith is everyone's business. Like it is all of our business that
Mhm.
understanding you know why our so many of our fellow Christians would follow an authoritarian is important. Our fellow Americans, like what is the and these are not bad people, you know, these are not as a whole, these are not bad people. And so understanding kind of, you know, how this happened and why and what is animating this this confluence. I think that's important for all of us in our society right now. And I thought the missionary story would be illuminating because it is a complex story. There has been good things done and there are good things still being done. And this is sort of the, you know, the I forget, is Jekyll the bad one or the good one and Hyde is the bad one? Anyway, this is
Mhm.
kind of the Jekyll of the Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, of the white evangelical movement is the missionary movement.
Are there 'cause
Well,
one of the things you point out is the problem with power and accountability in the missionary movement in the Southern Baptist Convention. Are there parallels between that and what you see going on in our country right now?
Oh, well, yeah, because it's a very tribal mindset, right? Whether you're
mhm.
and a lot of it again is it is due to this a rigid theological construct to where again you are right and you have to be right. Like if the certainty and the rightness demanded of evangelicalism is just sort of unfortunately feeds into a tribal mindset. Like we're right, everyone else is wrong, and you really don't have much wiggle room there. And so, therefore, like when things happen in your midst or like on your side, you know, that indicate that you're not right and sort of shake that construct, that is a cognitive dissonance that has to be dealt with, and too often it's been to then sweep it under the rug or ignore it or minimize it or justify it in some way. So like the abuse crisis, not just in Southern
Yeah.
Baptist world, but in evangelical world in particular. So that's, it's, we're trying, they're out there trying to promote the narrative that it's the drag queens that are threatening our children. What does it say when it's actually, there's a youth pastor or pastor, arrested, it seems like every few weeks, for sexual abuse. That doesn't work with the narrative. So, and certainly if it's a missionary, I mean, good grief, that's supposed to be the cream of the crop, right? So,
Well, and there's a pattern to it as well, where the person goes away for a while. I think Mark Driscoll is the person who comes to mind whenever we talk about this type of stuff. You go away, you do some, inner reflection, but there's no acts of repentance. There's no real forgiveness. And then you move to a new city and you do it all over again.
well, the victims are supposed to forgive. Like
Yeah.
they forgive, or they're sort of made to forgive.
Or they're turned into the villain
Oh yeah,
because they
oh,
wouldn't
that's the
forgive.
villain. Like if they, again, if they're making an issue of it, then they're not being forgiving, and so then they become the villain. So yeah, and in the missionary world, this sort of pattern of going away and then resurfacing is aided by geographical distance and jurisdictional gaps. So I talk about a lot of that in the book of just how easy it is to, you know, get away with something overseas, particularly in a developing country with poor rule of law and deference to white Americans, and then before 2003, there was no U.S. jurisdiction. 2003, a federal law was passed making it an American can be charged for child sexual abuse or child abuse. I think it's even broader than sexual abuse, but certainly child sexual abuse committed elsewhere in the world. There's a federal, but before that, there was no U.S. jurisdiction. Even with that, I mean, we all know how difficult it is to prosecute sexual crimes for many reasons. If you add the sort of massive jurisdictional, you know, the geographic and poor rule of law where the crime was committed, then it adds an additional layer of complexity. But there have been missionaries prosecuted since 2003 under that law.
Hmm. I'm sure that was even. Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, gosh, like oversight must have been much more difficult prior to the internet.
Yeah, I it yes, but it still is it still is difficult, So, I mean, I opened the book talking about a case of a missionary I knew growing up that murdered his wife and was allowed to just quietly leave the country, and he has never faced any even investigation anywhere. So,
Wow.
yep.
Well, that's a dark.
That's Thanks for lifting us up here towards the end of this.
Sorry. And for the mainliners, I'm sure there's some terrible
Let's,
mainline. I mean,
Holly,
like I said,
let's flip it around.
Tier was my pastor, and I always found him very suspect. So.
Oh man,
I'm joking.
So
put a
yeah,
disclosure on our. It's
We
just
miss
too
you,
far into
Tier.
the podcast. Nobody's listening anymore. At least
so
anybody that has power over
you
me.
yeah, you have this upbringing. You are now a part of Tier's former church, so you're like a mainline Christian. Flip it
As
around
mainline
and
as it gets.
help us understand what mainline Christians don't understand about um,
Hmm.
American evangelicals who support Donald Trump. Like, what do we miss in our
Ooh.
disdain?
Yeah. Well, again, I think if I can go like really broad, um, I think first of all, the theological constructs that form the basis of white evangelicalism in America, nationally, really do have their roots in Southern pro-slavery Christianity. So
Mhm.
there's that, and and obviously mainline theology, mainline churches were complicit in that as well, but have I think theologically repented and to a greater degree. So this goes way back, and there's a lot of, and if you haven't really faced your failures, um, you're defensive about them. I mean, have you noticed this in yourself? I certainly have. Like if you really can't face your failures, and if you don't want to face your failures, and if you sort of have sort of built your self concept on being right, and sort of having, being sort of morally right and theologically right, but just being excellent in any way, you don't really want to face your failures. So I feel like I cite a Christian psychologist in the book, Dave Verhagen, whose book was illuminating for me. It's called How White Evangelicals Think, and he's a Christian clinical psychologist, and presents data that there's a higher number of people with narcissist personality disorder, based on a questionnaire, in the white evangelical movement than in the general population. And by the way, Americans rank, as comparing countries, Americans rank we're a very narcissistic culture, which should surprise no one. But it's a very narcissistic, and so he then describes how white evangelicalism, collective narcissism, is kind of the overall construct. And so they have a history and a past that's shameful, that they haven't reckoned with. And then instead of reckoning with, they've continued to build an edifice on top of that, of this grandiose narrative of being, the good guys, and the people in the right, and the ones with the right theology, and the ones that are saving the world, and the ones that need to be in charge of America then. um and so I think that is a good way of thinking about it. Like it's really, I think at bottom, white evangelicals, a lot, and this is my experience growing up in it, there's a lot of fear there. I was constantly afraid of myself, um, that I was not really a believer, and the consequences of that were hell. Like, is my faith really legitimate? I would look around at others, and they looked like they were more sold out for Jesus than me. And so then I would fear for myself. But it's also a very fearful, they're very afraid. They're looking at all this change in American society, and I think they're legitimately afraid. They're legitimately afraid of, you know, where the country is going. The fact that they're losing influence, they see that as a really bad sign for the country writ large. And they feel embattled, and they feel afraid. And I don't think that that's a device. I think they really feel afraid of what's going on, and their waning influence. And by the way, their children leaving, that's terrifying. I mean, the evangelical movement is terrifying for them, because
Mhm.
they think their children leaving the movement, that their children are going to hell now, and that's terrifying to them. So I think we need to have a lot of compassion, because this is a deeply, deeply ingrained culture, that and it's increasingly insular. I didn't have a single non-evangelical friend or close
Hmm.
person, other than my grandparents were not actually Christians, which is an interesting thing. But I didn't have a single non-evangelical friend until I went to graduate school at the age of like 21 or 22. Um, I didn't have, and I went into graduate school like, onward Christian soldier. I'm going in there. I'm like, got the battle of, I got to save all these people. It's a
You got
tremendous,
your belt of
yeah,
righteousness ready to go.
yeah, it's a tremendous
Belt of righteousness.
burden. Anyway, so I think I try to tell myself, like, these are deep, deep beliefs, that are deeply ingrained. People have, in many cases, no other, outside influence, and it is a culture of fear, and there's a lot of and that's terrible. And so I feel like, maybe we can have some compassion for that, um, and
Yeah, I was thinking r- recently that, like Barack Obama ran initially as an opponent of gay marriage. So like I think maybe like progressives in America don't appreciate just how quickly things have changed and how disorienting that can be for some of our neighbors.
yeah,
No, I'm reading this Kamala Harris's 107 Days, and in that she says that was a political strategy to get him in, so
of
that
course so.
then the law could be
Of
changed.
course it was.
That was all strategy, Jason.
I think it
I,
was strategy actually, but
but from the perspective of like people experiencing cultural
Yes,
change, that I can't believe you're reading that book. But anyway,
yeah, I'm not
it's a
gonna.
great. It's
I'm too
really well
sad.
written
It's
by
too
someone
sad.
else. It's pretty good.
It's too. I can't. I just. It's too sad. It's all too sad. Too soon. Too soon. Um.
Can't do a
yeah, I
post
mean,
mortem while the body's still warm.
Yeah.
it's both political parties can disappoint you. That's what the last year's been like for.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
I
I'm
think
not.
since 2015, but
Yeah.
maybe before.
I think humans are disappointing if you want to just take it broadly. We're capable of great love and community and wonderful things, and then we're also capable of, again, tribal fear and dread and power hungriness and all the bad things. So
Yeah.
we're the problem and we're the solution, and it's that's the way it is.
Well, yeah, people are sinners. Christians are people. Christians are sinners.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Even evangelicals, they're sinners, and the mainliners, we know they're sinners.
I think I said that in the sermon. I said that in the sermon at your church that you don't remember.
What
So,
the
Oh, that was probably the most. That's probably what offended them the most, is to hear that they're sinners.
um,
one thing I'll notice about one thing I've noticed a difference between like a mainline tradition and even in the modern service and the evangelical, like in my experience in evangelicalism, there was always it was always an individual appeal to repentance. There was an altar call, there was an individual, search your heart, get right with your, BFF Jesus. It was always, individual repentance. And by the way, it was always the same people that actually were repenting, and all the people that really needed to repent, the real narcissists, never repented. So that there was that. Like I grew up like self-flagellate, just like flagellating myself like constantly. And then, the missionary dude's murdering his wife, and he goes on to, and just zero self-reflection, I'm sure.
he
Um,
did not surrender all.
no, no. So, anyway, it's always the wrong people repenting in evangelicalism. Or I mean, they all are repenting, but it's always the same people. It's always the usual
Yeah.
repentant suspects, and the people that really need it just never dawns on them that they're actually the problem. Versus the main line, the collective. Like every service, you do it's a communal repentance. And by the way, I have my Jewish friends tell me, we're in the high holidays, Yom Kippur. It's a communal repentance, and I think I think you need both. I think you do need both, but I will say the communal repentance and the idea that, again, that there's something collectively, we've built a culture, we've built a culture over time that is deeply flawed and even toxic and harmful. That is not something that is present in evangelicalism at all.
Hmm.
And it's a big difference between the two.
Well, Holly, the book is The Missionary Kids.
I'm
Yeah,
holding it
I
up. I don't know why I'm holding it up. It's an audio podcast, but
it and
I'm holding it
it's
up.
right behind her
Yeah,
too. So,
and I'm pointing to
Yeah,
it
it's right there.
an
It's right
audio
there.
so
podcast.
where can people find you, Holly?
I am on the various social media. I hate Instagram, but I am on there. I'm really on Substack, A Zebra Without Stripes. And then I have a big presence on Blue Sky. I am not on X because actually Charlie Kirk chased me off of X. He harassed me. That's another whole
You did. I
story.
remember that. That's enough.
So
We could do that episode for the
yeah, exactly.
pay subscription only people.
And the last thing I'll say that I just think your audience should maybe know about Tyr is that Tyr left, and then the church burned down.
Nope, I left after the church burned down.
You left after the church burned down.
Here's what happened. I went out of town for 8.
I just think
I went out of town for 12 hours, and the church burned down.
Regardless of the exact timing of it, the coincidence of Tyr's departure and the church burning down, I just still wonder about. And
He's bad luck. Yeah.
Here's the issue. Here's what's really bad is your church burned down, and then I was like, "I'm out. See you later. Good luck." Sounds like a you problem, not a me problem.
I'm sure you've heard about it. It's been a freaking nightmare. So
I've learned a lot about asbestos abatement.
So, listeners, if you purchase the book, Holly pledges to give the proceeds to Mount Olivet United Methodist Church.
Well, they do get some of the proceeds because I tithe. I mean, I don't. Well, actually, I don't know if it. My husband handled all that, so I don't even know. I do know we give money to the church. I don't know if it's a full tithe.
Still a good evangelical.
You want to do a full tithe, 10% at least as a baseline. And I don't know how he figures that because he's a money guy and I'm not. So,
well, I will be sure to send him a link to my church's giving page, and he can set up another direct deposit to us as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Holly.
Thanks, Holly.